Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A live stream number 63. Can you believe it's 63 already? Being recorded on November 10, 2022. So we're picking up from yesterday's stream in which we did a lot of coverage of the USA midterms. And, this isn't a SOCDEM channel. We're not going to beat it to death. There's a few other things that we can maybe take away from this piece of news, and we're going to get into some of the polling around the midterms and things like that, as well as maybe some lessons to be learned about the behavior of the Democratic Party, why it's time to completely decouple from that party if you haven't already. And then step two is, of course, organize, obviously, in a Marxist party if you're ready for that. Really, I would like to see, there's so many people in the U.S. left who just, they see through the Democratic Party and then they just stop. They won't go build another party. Even the Green Party would be a step up over doing nothing. And that's really what too many people do, is they do absolutely nothing at all. Obviously, join a Marxist party if you find a good one that you can actually get involved with and you're ready for that ideologically. But like I said, there's just this general lethargy, this inactivity. People don't seem to be trying to do very much at all. That's why I say things like, I would rather see people at least out there struggling, trying to build the Greens or whatever, than just doing absolutely nothing. Class consciousness is raised in part through struggle, fighting fights, whether it's taking on a local corporation, a local landlord, whatever it is. You gain a lot of knowledge and experience through those campaigns, forming a union, whatever it is. And if people aren't out there struggling, the class consciousness is just not going to build as strongly. And yeah, you can read history, you can read theory, which of course in Marxism they overlap because theory is based on history and it's applied, history is applied theory and all that kind of stuff. But if people aren't out there struggling, we're not going to have a very good vanguard. People aren't going to be very experienced. People aren't going to be very class conscious. They're not going to be sharpened. We need people enrolling in the schools of socialism and getting out there and building class consciousness. And I kind of don't care where people start, because at this point I don't think that we have the party yet. If we did, I'd be telling people to join that exclusively. I don't think we have it yet. I think that we need a coalition of all the existing groups, getting them together, having them exchange ideas, being in dialogue. That's going to improve everything. We would probably get the party out of that. It would be a piece of this group and another organization or party. The whole thing would join it, and then there'd be a small splinter group off of this group, and we would get the party out of that. If you look at in the past something like, for example, the IWW, which I think was one of the shining moments in U.S. Revolutionary history. Unfortunately, it didn't go the distance, was subject to massive repression. But that was a super group, if you will, of many different labor unions of different sizes, some very large, some small, coming together and then forming this huge organization, which was more than just an organization. It was also a mass movement. And I think that something like that, again, it becomes more than the sum of its parts, and so on. And obviously we here at Socialism for All, this is a Marxist unity channel to the extent that that is possible. There are people who pass themselves off as Marxists who actually don't adhere to anything really resembling Marxism, and that's been a struggle since the very early days of this entire thing, decades and decades, over a century ago. But we would lobby for as much of a actually solid Marxist class conscious analysis, and we're out to improve the quality of the left here as much as that's possible in a country like the United States. So this is, like I said, Marxist Unity channel. We lean Marxist Leninist, so that's what the focus of the education is on here. But we have the left that we have in the United States, trying to raise the bar on that, trying to raise the quality, hoping at the end of the decade, by 2030, there can be some kind of something a lot more substantial, because we know the conditions are going to keep getting worse. And looking at things like the midterms and, like I said, the behavior of the Democratic Party, who just sort of stumbled across the finish line in this case with some major losses sustained, but they're trying to call it a win. We're going to get into that after talking to the chat, and we're going to look at some polling related to what was on voters' minds during the midterm, which is important to know, what's on people's minds and breaking it down by different demographics and things like that. It can only help for outreach and messaging of the left. So yeah, anyway, before we get into anything else today, let's thank the patrons whose names are on the screen. Patreon.com/socialism for all. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more. I would make content if nobody paid, but the fact that people do support the channel allows me to spend a lot more time on it. We're doing at least 4 hours of live streams plus other content at this point, and believe me that takes many hours of preparation. For every hour of content on the channel, there's at least an hour of prep and production time. So anyway, all that support is appreciated. Also, engagement counts, so like, share, subscribe, leave comments. I do moderate the comments, so if you don't see your comments, because I have to publish it, and I may not always, and if I don't publish one of your comments, it doesn't mean I won't publish the next one, but I just try to keep things fairly straightforward in the comments, and most comments do get published anyway. So thanks again to the patrons and everybody supporting the channel through engagement, helping YouTube to boost it, recommend it to more people. So I gotta say, we're gonna get into the chat now, but I am a bit low energy today. I've learned to only do 2 streams a week because that's, I think, all I have in me at this point with other stuff that I'm doing. And today in particular, I got up a little. Well, I had some time, and I decided to check in on Twitter. Actually, there was a situation where somebody, turning into a longer story than I thought it would be, there's a comrade who has been following on Twitter for some time and was posting messages that they were in real distress last night, and I was trying to reach out to them and get some other people to reach out to them as well. So I was checking in on that this morning, and I'm wishing that comrade well, and I'm hoping that nothing bad happens. So anyway, thinking of you if you're listening out there, Mr. I believe, well, anyway. But in the process of all this, and just posting a few random opinions about the midterms, I stumbled onto Democratic Party Twitter, which is not a fun place to be. And hold on, I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. Anyway, if I sneeze suddenly, my nose is doing that thing where you get the itch, and it's like you're not quite gonna sneeze, but I don't want my entire right side of my face tearing up so that I can't talk. But anyway, yeah. So basically, the Democratic Party is trying to spin it as a gigantic win, even though they probably have lost the House. And they may lose the Senate also. So why is this a, quote, win? Basically, there were huge losses forecast, and they didn't have huge losses. They still had losses, though. So it may be appropriate for them to feel somewhat relieved, but not to, have a victory celebration. Those are 2 different things. And they seem to be confusing the two. But they're trying to really sell it as like, oh my God, this is a groundbreaking, history-making moment. It is true that historically the incumbent party gets hit pretty hard in the midterms, and Congress might flip or whatever. And indeed, that looks like it's happening, but it's not happening as much as was forecast. Okay, that's still a loss. I don't know how to tell you that, but that's still a loss. And you're up against a party full of QAnon Nazis, and this is the best that you can do. Meanwhile, you're shitting on the left, and that's a whole part of your strategy as well. Joe Biden is the nothing will fundamentally change candidate. And I swear to God, it was like, House of Mirrors, just totally disorienting, trying to navigate the tortured, twisted logic that these people are putting out. A somewhat larger Democratic Party account quote tweeted one of my fairly, I thought, innocuous and obvious and common sense statements about this. And I don't know, I mean, it must be bots, because literally they don't have that much bigger of an account than I do. and they had like 400 likes within about like under a minute. That's unusual. But anyway, it wound up becoming this kind of, I spent probably an hour responding to different people, and I'm trying to back it up to where this began. But I was really shocked at just the amount of, you can call it cope or whatever, and it is. I tend not to like that. It's like so dismissive. But I mean, it really, it's spin, I think that's the older term. It's a bit more accurate. What I was put out last night is breaking. Democrats flipped a bunch of seats this election. So, like, for example, they keep saying, but Michigan, but Michigan. Okay, Democrats had a great day the other day in Michigan. They managed to, like, basically flip the whole state legislature. Great. You are aware that by count of states, Michigan is only 2% of the United States, though, right? So, I mean, okay, there were successes and there were failures. The amount of spin comes off as delusional when you present it this way. So anyway, they flipped a bunch of seats this election, and they will flip right back in a cycle or two. And around we go, acting like it's, the parting of the Red Sea every time it happens. This is just simply what the system does. For decades now, it's been flipping back and forth for the 1990s Democratic Party and on. So like the last 30 years, it just flips back and forth. Why? Because, it's this basic cycle of the Democrats have gone so right-wing, they've abandoned even their sort of left-liberal social democratic wing, and they have become not indistinguishable from Republicans because there are still some at least, superficial differences. But, of course, they collude on every major project involving the maintenance and expansion of the U.S. empire and the internal police state. Everything relevant to that, they absolutely collude on. Democrats try to have a sort of superficial or hollow anti-fascism, but there is no meaningful anti-fascism, just as there's no meaningful anti-imperialism without pursuing socialism. Democrats, on the other hand, are trying to pass themselves off as anti-fascist without even pursuing social democracy at this point. So, I mean, it's so empty and it's so hollow. So, what was the person? So this is Jeff Ettinger Memorial Stadium. I responded to one of their tweets, and I didn't take screenshots of all this, but I'll read it to you. And I thought that this was... oh, here we go. He was actually quote tweeting another Marxist. I didn't even see this. So the Marxist was saying, what impact? They literally took away a fundamental part of someone's right to bodily autonomy. And so talking about the Republicans, they took away a fundamental part of someone's right to bodily autonomy, talking about abortion. And it's cost the Republicans what exactly? Losing control of the Senate for an extra midterm and maybe having a House with only a 1 or 2 seat majority. That's a massive win overall for Republicans. And this account was saying, given the historical context of midterm elections, the economy, and presidential approval, in other words, everything is super shitty and it's obviously the Democrats' fault, the fact that they didn't get completely blown the fuck out is a massive effect. And then they continued saying, if Democrats are capable, so this is where it starts really becoming diluted, in my opinion, and it starts to draw illogical conclusions. If Democrats are capable of winning a midterm under a Democratic president, something that is perfectly conceivable now, well, it really remains to be seen if they won a midterm. They lost control of the House most likely, and there are 3 Senate seats that are still contested. So in Nevada and Arizona, they're still counting the votes, last I checked, and Georgia is going to a runoff, and that's fucking Herschel Walker. They're struggling against Herschel fucking Walker. Okay, that's nothing to brag about. It's really not. So anyway, if Democrats are capable of winning a midterm, okay, big if, so already we're heading into a parallel timeline here. Something that's perfectly conceivable now, again, stretch some more, that completely and utterly changes the entire political calculus. It opens up everything. Okay, now you've entered Never Never Land. I mean, we're really off in just a fantasy world at this point. And my main reaction to this is like, you're drawing conclusions that the evidence just simply does not logically support. You had like a freak accident because you're running against people's hatred of MAGA and Trump, basically. That still hasn't worn off. Trump was ousted only in 2020, and then, it's January 6th, and then overturning Roe v. Wade, and just people being sick of MAGA generally. It's been a while, and there's a lot of people who have gotten really sick of MAGA. They see that they have nothing to offer. Obviously, they don't. And so the Democrats still have that atmosphere. That's what's still circulating in the general mood of things right now. So obviously running against that, it's not that difficult. And so I stated in response to this, Dems are hanging on by their fingernails at best, cannot understand how people are interpreting this as a win. So instead of responding to this, they quote tweeted it, and they said, which of course shows it to their whole audience. And they said, here's your first step. Read a single thing ever written about American political history. What? That doesn't really, I responded. I said, I've read a single thing, still waiting on your explanation of this. And then I was just fielding inquiries from dozens and dozens of this Democratic chud audience. And, so a few of the replies from me, incoherent response to a statement of fact about the Democrats' quote win in the midterm elections. Democrats are hanging on by fingernails at best, spitting in faces of voters demanding change, gaslighting about COVID, the economy, healthcare, everything. So the goalposts at this point are they performed terribly but didn't get completely obliterated when re-election time came. But again, here in reality, we don't consider this excellence. All right. Both parties are hated. The GOP just happens to be a bit more hated this time. If you start drawing grand conclusions from this, you might be a Democratic strategist. I mean, it's just unmoored from reality. You can't start drawing grand conclusions from this. The GOP is slightly more hated for the moment. That's not going to last forever. This isn't a win. Again, the Democrats showed up to battle with their guns unloaded. The Republicans showed up and had their mortars facing backwards and blew themselves up. That is dumb luck of circumstance. I mean, that's all it is. And if you start drawing massive conclusions off of that, it comes off as delusional, like just, anyway. But I had all kinds of Democrats, you don't matter, your opinion doesn't matter, people don't like big swings in policy. As I keep telling yourself this as the USA slumps into worse and worse conditions. People talking about the, quote, amazing recession response we had during the pandemic. The what now? It goes on, same person was saying, Bernie's vision won, and you can't admit it because that win doesn't look the way you think it should. I don't even know how to respond to that. It's just, like I said, unmoored from reality. The best thing is when Democrats try to talk in Marxist terms, like they'll condescend, like, listen here, little Marxist, let me explain it to you in Marxist terms. I'm a Democrat. I speak both Democrat and Marxist. Let me try to explain it. And we got eventually to a quote, Marx didn't say, this guy wrote paragraphs and paragraphs. He wrote a whole thread to me. Didn't read most of it. Marx didn't say unwinding a capitalist state was easy, exclamation point. Marx didn't talk about unwinding capitalism at all. He talked about organizing workers in spaces free of capitalist influence for all-out class struggle and proletarian revolution. Don't talk to me about Marx as a Democrat, for fuck's sake. So, the Democrats had to work hard, as another poster was putting it, to shake off nearly a century of congressional control, and they want recognition for achievements in political malpractice. Again, the government just keeps flipping back and forth. It's completely meaningless. You won today. Where are you going to be in 4 years? Where are you going to be in 6 years? It's just up for grabs. You might as well flip a coin to determine the outcome of the U.S. government. So, I don't know what to say, but this was it really was a disorienting experience trying to talk to Democrats about this stuff. And people say, like, oh, you're like lead poisoned, all this stuff. I'm like, this is very typical Dem outreach. You just don't want to hear reality at all. Somebody else saying, have you got any evidence that the Democrats, fail on purpose and deliberately go nowhere, and they do the absolute calculated bare minimum to, try to slightly edge out the Republican Party. As somebody else was tweeting, we collectively stood up as a group and said that fascism is not acceptable in this country, and if 3 fewer of us had shown up, we would have said the opposite. Anyway, somebody else coming out. No, I think that this actually was a great midterm and portends a bright 2024. This struck me as really funny in the sense that whether a Democrat or a Republican were to make that statement, it would be equally absurd, thinking that it was a great midterm portending a bright 2024. We're sliding towards another 2008 style economic meltdown on a global level. There's no real end in sight at all. And again, around and around we go. So we can get into some more specifics of what voters were thinking about. But again, the bottom line is, if the left does not detach from this absolutely delusional party, which calculates to do the bare minimum to defeat forces that, in their terms, are the destroyers of democracy and the balance of life as we know it, is, hanging by a delicate thread. And then they literally won't lift a finger to ally with the left and send this immense threat into the dustbin of history where QAnon Nazis belong. And, there's not a major distinction, by the way, between MAGA Republicans and, quote, respectable Republicans. When you break it down, there's about a 5% difference between them. All Republicans are essentially MAGA Republicans. Some are a bit more polished about it. So, and then he got the difference between Democrats and Republicans. It's a sick thing, and if you don't decouple from the system, you will go around and around and around forever. And somebody, I was just stating this, I don't support the Democratic Party. Do you still support the Democratic Party? If so, why? Why would you do that? Are you wealthy? That's the only reason I could possibly think of. But yeah, again, we slide towards another 2008. Biden literally, when asked, what do you plan to do different? Given that your performance in the midterms was not good, you sort of squeaked by with minimal failures. What do you plan to do differently moving into the future? Biden literally said nothing. He said, we don't plan to do anything differently, because the more that people find out what the Democratic Party is doing, the more they like it. That's not really true. And anyway, that's, the head of the party. What can you say? I came away just dumbfounded, dumbstruck from all of those conversations this morning. And I spoke with a good, 2-3 dozen people at least. And I'm still shaking my head. I'm still just like, wow. Because, I spend most of my time talking to socialists and other people on the far left. Our analysis tends to be, if depressing, a bit more, weighted in reality. Depressing in the sense that it's great to find out that there is an alternative to capitalism and that there's this whole international history of the international communist movement, and, all kinds of radicals out there really, getting their hands dirty and putting their finger on the pulse of what's actually wrong, opposing capitalism at the root, etc. And for a while, that's super inspiring and uplifting. And then, again, we have to apply this to the present reality. And the process of trying to explain to Americans, like in the U.S. left, that they need to stop supporting Democrats and then not do nothing but actually organize independently. It's like one of the most frustrating things you can possibly imagine. So, anyway. All right, chat time as promised. Let's see what's going on. Are the midterms a shit show or what? Yeah, I think the thing with elections in general is the left needs to not allow, we need to note what's happening, but don't let it derail your campaigns, whatever you're working on. One of the focuses of yesterday's stream when we were covering this stuff was the ballot measures, which a lot of the change that happened on Tuesday, or that has now been logged as the public is in favor of, putting abortion in a state constitution, the right to abortion in a state constitution, or decriminalizing cannabis, or other things that were directly on the ballot. These things happened despite either Democrats or Republicans, not because of them. And somebody's like, oh, well, the Democrats support the state abortion thing. If they really supported it, we wouldn't be in this position where it had to go on the fucking state ballot in the first place. Obama said it would be his top priority in 2007. In 2009, when asked, hey, you said that was the first thing you were going to do, why haven't you done it? He just said, it's not my top priority. And this is just an example of, over and over again. So the Democratic Party, it's a hideous sight. And like I said, my head was just spinning afterwards. I just had not seen so much cope and spin in forever. I don't know how you can possibly qualify this as a win. And I know the logic. It's all Republicans said that they were going to do really well, and they didn't do as well as they thought. They still fucking won in like many places. What are you talking about? Anyway. I would love it if the Democratic Party did fucking anything for working people. That's not the way it's set up. They first won the presidency 194 years ago, and this is the system that they have begotten. So, I'm so glad the Democrats organized a sufficient grassroots effort to stave off fascism for 2 more years. I mean, they collaborate with the fascism, obviously. I know what you're saying. But this is the sort of end stage U.S. imperial politics that we're in, where it's just like every election, oh my God, we're on the brink. And you know what? Things are terrible. Fascization has been going for a long time now. I mean, it's been 20 years since the war on terror started, and they've been really severely militarizing the police departments and stuff like that. I mean, like, we're well into this process. And the Democrats, the best that they're going to offer you is they're going to fundraise off of that while literally helping to make it happen. Actually, that reminds me, that specific point. So here's something actually good that happened. Kenneth Mejia, apologies if I'm not pronouncing his name right. So this is a guy in LA. He's a Green. And he ran for a couple different offices, I think starting in 2016. And he ran for the city controller, Los Angeles. And this is one of his billboards. And that's hardcore. That's a great billboard. This is where socialist, leftist running campaigns can be good for propagandizing. In the course of the campaign, if you run your campaign correctly, you can raise money to get a huge message out to people. So the person that he was up against, it's California, so it's like entrenched Democratic Party up and down at every level pretty much. In the north, you start to get into some like, Northwest Territorial Imperative, like Republican, fascist kind of stuff. Most of the rest of the states, Democrats. And so it's all like within the party politics. But anyway, he's a Green. And he ran this ad running against an establishment, run-of-the-mill Democrat who was touting, some of you may remember, the COVID funds. If cities and localities didn't spend the COVID funds on, COVID stuff, they could spend them on police instead. So his Democratic opponent was touting, spending more money on cops as like a major win. And this guy ran billboards asking people a very pointed question. So people hate the police in this country by and large. And so they say, where will your tax dollars be spent? Police, and they got a bar graph here, police, $3.1 billion. Then homelessness, $802 million. Then transportation, $342 million. Then housing, $248 million. And then a mere $41 million community investment for families. That's how you do it. That's a great campaign, and he trounced the guy. So this race was, I think, nonpartisan, so the Green party affiliation was not listed. He was a Green at least up to 2021. I'm not sure if he still is or not, but I don't think it mattered in this race. But anyway, that's where he's coming from. And we need more of this kind of shit, honestly, because we need, it's one thing to do the YouTube channel, the stream, whatever. You got to get it out there in the real world, and I would like to see a lot more stuff like this being spawned. And, it's not just about winning the elections, it's about building a party, building a coalition, building a mass movement. And you can use campaigns, whether you win or lose, to help build that movement. But unlike Bernie Sanders, who built a movement around him because you had all the millions of people who showed up for Occupy, a lot of people came out for Bernie Sanders again, talking about the same kind of stuff, because post-2008, these are our problems. These are the things that are on people's minds. And so it's, just addressing those basic grievances that people have, working people have in the system. The thing about Bernie is he built the movement temporarily around his campaign, then fed it into the Democratic Party, which is like putting it into a paper shredder. You can't preserve the integrity of the movement that way when you feed it into a bourgeois-controlled, capitalist-controlled, 1% controlled party that's going to completely break it up, mangle it to suit its interest. You have to keep it independent. You need it in a space, again, as Marx said, that is free of bourgeois influence, that is proletarian controlled, so that we can strategize, educate, organize, agitate for the general class struggle. And election campaigns should be used to build class consciousness, to advertise the ideas of socialism, to get out there, and to take a head count of what kind of support we have showing up. These are the purposes of it. But this is a great example of, how to do it correctly. I would love to see more stuff like that. So anyway, getting back to the chat. After I get the screen up, there we go. I bet Colorado's neighbor states start putting up border checkpoints, because Colorado legalized cannabis a while ago. They also legalized some other plant psychedelics. I haven't looked at all the details on that. Colorado is fucked. They're running out of water, in a drought, and on trajectory to have another nasty fire season. That is bad. The Dems were trying to stave off fascism. I mean, obviously, they say that, but they collude with it at every level. Again, they fundraise off of it. It's like the closer to the knife's edge that they bring us, the better their chances of being able to win elections off of "we're not the Republicans." They've been doing this at least since Bush and Cheney. They just run the anybody but Bush strategy. That was what it was known as in 2004. And they've really kind of stuck with that. Oh no, but look at the Republicans. You have to vote for us. This is what and it's getting more and more pronounced, because it's an excuse to do less and less for voters every single time around. I mean, we need to dismantle this system, and it's not going to happen through elections. But even conditions within the system are getting insane at this point. Oh, interesting. There's a Politsturm article about the CPUSA attitude toward the midterms. Interesting. I got to read that. Thank you for the link. Yeah, there will be many fellow travelers on the socialist road. So fellow traveler is a name. There's also a YouTuber by that name. It's a slang term for people who aren't in a communist party, but agree with them and sort of travel in the same circles. So yeah, this is why the left coalition, there's a lot of people who aren't going to join outright, but you get a coalition going, you get a movement going, you get actions going, people absolutely will join into it, and you can get a lot of cross-pollination of ideas at that point. Everybody wins from that. I mean, already what we've seen as far as the far left emerging in the later, well, really post-Occupy, and in a way post-2008 in general, when capitalism came back on the agenda to oppose capitalism, because again, before 2008, that wasn't really discussed broadly in society in general. Capitalism itself became contested after 2008, and the agitation, education, and organization of the anti-capitalist, you know, factions within society, it started to grow and grow. I think it's better now than it has been in a very long time. That said, it still has quite a way to go. And, you know, again, I'm hoping by 2030, with consistent efforts, there can be, you know, a fairly sophisticated grasp of history and theory that becomes a lot more commonplace. So that's one of, again, the purposes of this channel and similar channels. I know PSL is going to lean towards broad coalition this next year. I think that that is kind of the approach at this point. Once you've gotten tens of millions of people mobilized, and there's constant struggle, and there's unions, and there's strikes, and there's this and that, you're going to get a vanguard out of that, and that vanguard will decide what to do. I don't even think we have the numbers at this point, which is why I'm calling for, you know, to me the way forward is just more action. You can organize, you know, whatever small, you know, parties you would like to organize. That's great. If it helps you and the, you know, several dozen other people involved with it to significantly advance your understanding and your study and maybe get actions going and connect with the community and lead, you know, some struggles and things, that's all great. Eventually, you know, the United States is a huge country, 330 some million people in it. We have to mobilize at least tens of millions of people. And I don't think any one party is going to be doing that. I do think working together, that's probably the most realistic next step. And like I said, from there, you know, these are stages, I believe. I do think that from there, we will get the party. But I think we're still like several steps off from that right now. People in the United States may not realize, I mean, not only has the United States never had a revolutionary moment, not even really close, the extent, you know, I mentioned the IWW as like one of the shining moments of, you know, really revolutionary organization that also was a mass movement. You know, and there have been other ones. I think that that was a great example that spawned. They incorporated a lot of elements of migrant worker and like hobo culture, and really were organizing people at the very, you know, bottom strata of society. And it became this huge kind of cultural thing as well. You needed to be more than just the organization. So speaking of picking up fellow travelers, you know, people get involved in it because it just speaks to their lives and their conditions, and it's something to do. You know, that's a lot of why people do things in the end, is like, well, I could do this or that. That looks better. I'm going to do that. And, you know, next thing you know, you have more people showing up at your picket line or whatever. And, yeah, anyway, back to the chat. So there's a, I can't even explain this on the stream. There was something about, on Twitter now people pay $8 a month to have a blue check, and it's really stupid. And there's a big account that was just like, block these people on site. And that's one way to deal with it, because then having a blue check will be an extreme liability and no one will want one. You'll starve Elon Musk of money. And there you go. So, I don't know. There was some, like, I thought kind of idiotic posts coming off of that. You have to understand. So it was Drill Wint. I mean, I think you have to understand that account a bit. So there's context there. As far as what you're talking about, I thought that was a kind of absurd complaint. It was like, well, I'm not even gonna get into that. I'm not gonna dignify that with a response. Yeah, Democrats didn't lose as badly as expected and call it a win. Pathetic. And again, you know, end of story. Close the book at that point. But no. Go on to Democratic Twitter. Say that exact thing. See what happens. It's honestly unbelievable. Oh yeah, so big strike in Greece. I didn't have time to do certain things for the show today. But yeah, I saw the story that there was a massive strike in Athens like the entire city was taken over. Try to make a point of sharing something on the community tab about that. Athens. Will my pen work? With some difficulty. Okay. Oh, fuck off. You know, there was an election this week. We're going to have 2 streams about it. Fuck off. You know, if you want to see wasting time, go to the Humanist Report, go to Secular Talk, where this is all they talk about. Give me a break, man. There was an election. It was kind of big news. We're going to mention it. Seriously. That billionaire running in LA dumped $100 million for a mayoral campaign. $100 million for a mayoral campaign. These streams would be better if, hey, shut the fuck up. How about that? Jesus Christ. I don't even recognize this user. Jesus, start your own fucking stream. There you go. Oh yeah, Amazon lost $1 trillion. But now they want to do cost-cutting strategies. I wonder what those will be. Same thing with Facebook's Meta losing tons of money. Yeah, stock market's been up and down. Again, can you even fucking say? Anyway, let's read some polling about where people's heads are at. We have other stuff we're going to get into later in the stream. This is kind of a casual stream today, but let's get into it. So this is from Pew Research, and got a number of graphics here. Midterm election preferences differ substantially by race, age, and education. This is good, just baseline education for people to have. If you want to understand existing politics at all, you know, as socialists become more relevant within politics, some of this will change, but it's always helpful to understand the current conditions for what they are. So, what do we have? Sorry, spacing out here. Okay, all registered voters, 41% Democratic, 40% Republican, 18% other or not sure. So we have men leaning Republican, 39% Democrat, 45% Republican, that's fairly significant. Women leaning Democratic, 43% to 37%. Then, breaking this down by race, and then race and gender. So white overall lean Republican, not surprising. 49% Republican and 36% Democratic out of the white registered voters. So that's a pretty substantial 13-point split. Now, if we break this down by white men, that is 54% Republican, 34% Democratic. So white men, 20% leaning towards the Republican side. And very similar for women, 37%, white women specifically, 37% Democratic, 46% Republican. Then, if we go into black registered voters overall, 69% Democratic, 4% Republican, and 27% other or not sure. Now, let's look at that for a second. And actually, real quick, let's skip down. Hispanic, also 27%, neither party. Asian, 25%, neither party. So what do we see? Substantially more white registered voters are not, or substantially fewer are not affiliated with either party, 14%. And that's again versus 27 or 25% for black, Hispanic, and Asian registered voters. Almost double. All right, so anyway. And then black men, 70% Democratic, 6% Republican, slightly more. So in both white and black, men and women, or sorry, same way, more men lean Republican than women. For Hispanic, it's more evenly split, 44% Democratic, 28% Republican, 27 other. So almost as many not sure or, you know, not Democratic or Republican as Republican. So you can see on down the line there. I don't want to just make this entire stream reading these numbers. So then I think also interesting age and education level. So the younger you are, the more likely to lean Democrat or neither. The older you are, the more likely you are to lean Republican, period. Up to 65 and up, 50% leaning Republican, and then of 65 and up, 38% Democrat, 12% neither. So fairly clear trend there. The older you are, the more likely you are to be Republican, the less likely you are to be affiliated with neither party. All right. So as far as education level, high school or less, basically the more education you have, the more likely you are to lean Democrat specifically. And also the less likely you are to be unaffiliated. Less likely you are to be unaffiliated or Republican. So it starts with high school education or less, majority Republican, or sorry, plurality Republican, 43%, 33% Democrat, 23% neither. And then some college, but not graduated, 41% Republican, 38% Democrat, 20% unaffiliated. College grad becomes plurality Democratic. 49% Democrat, 38% Republican, 12% neither. And post-grad, 54% Democrat, 37% Republican, 8% neither. Veterans, far more likely to be Republican than Democrat. 56% Republican, 28% Democrat, and 15% unaffiliated. And then a union member. Not the split you might imagine it to be, but union member, 49% Democrat, 38% Republican, 13% unaffiliated. Non-union member, 40%. So a 9-point difference. You know, a lot of the unions give to the Republicans and not at all to the a lot of the unions give to the Democrats and not at all to the Republicans. Yet, the 9 points is not the hugest split that you might expect. All right, moving on to the next one. This gets, I think, more into issues and priorities. Okay, the economy remains the top issue for voters in the midterms, and then it's broken down here by Democratic candidate supporters, Republican candidate supporters, and then all registered voters. So overall, the economy was ranked as the top issue for voters. That had a score of 79 for all registered voters. And Republicans said 92% that was the top issue. Or actually, I'm not even sure. Are these percentage points? Yeah, this is how many mentioned it. So 92% of Republicans mentioned it. 65% of Democrats. Interesting. The future of democracy in the country was the second biggest issue. 70% mentioned that. Democrats 80%, but then Republicans 70%. So the Republicans will go on at length about, it's a republic, not a democracy, and all this kind of really pedantic shit. And then, they're the ones, well, now they've worked themselves up into this whole, election fraud hysteria. I mean, and nearly ranking as high as the Democrats, again, 70%, right behind the 80%. Education, higher is the third issue, higher with Democrats than Republicans. Healthcare, issue number 4, much higher with Democrats than Republicans, 79 to 42% there. Energy policy is number 5, that's the same. Violent crime, the same at 63 each, 61 overall. Violent crime, Republicans, of course, much more. 74% of Republicans mentioned that. A minority of Democrats, 45%, mentioned that. Next, policies about how elections and voting work in the country. So more Democrats than Republicans, 64 to 57% mentioned that. It's weird. I feel like the future of democracy in the country, there's a lot of overlap there. It'd be interesting what the methodology was. And then it goes down from there. Major splits on climate change. 68% of Democrats felt that was important. 9% single-digit Republicans, and 38% overall. So I mean, overall, climate change. This is what voters care about. A minority of voters thought that climate change was in, their top concerns. COVID also way down at the bottom. Coronavirus outbreak, 32% of Democrats, 12% of Republicans, 23% of all registered voters. Issues around race and ethnicity, Democrat 52, Republican 13. So anyway, you can see things, some obvious ones. The size and scope of the federal government, 60%. Most Republicans are hugely up in arms about that. Couldn't really tell you probably many specifics. So continuing, Republican and Democratic voters are deeply divided over race, gender, Islam, and foreign policy. So here's a statement. Percentage of registered voters who say, agree with the following statement: white people do not benefit much or at all from advantages in society that black people do not have. So basically, do you believe that white privilege is a thing? All registered voters, 43%. And so a majority do think that white privilege is real. It's fairly slim at 57%, though. Republicans, 79% say, nope, white privilege is not a thing. Democrats, only 10%. So 9 out of 10 Democrats think that white privilege is a thing. 1 in 10 really don't. So anyway. Government regulation of business usually does more harm than good. Do you believe that statement? Yes or no? Republicans 76%, Democrats 13%, overall 44%. And then a question about sexism. The obstacles that once made it harder for women than men to get ahead are now largely gone. Well, fortunately, I would say a minority of overall registered voters agree with that. Yeah, that's correct. A minority agree, 47%. So it's weird because some of these are framed negatively and some are not. So it's a little hard to stack them up. But I guess they phrased them in a way where the Democrats wind up being the lower number in every case, just for the sake of consistency, I guess. Anyway, the obstacles that once made it harder for women than men to get ahead are now largely gone. Democrats 20%. So only 2 in 10 Democrats think that sexism is over. 8 out of 10 think otherwise. And again, about half of all registered voters think sexism is over. 76% of Republicans or Republican candidate supporters think that sexism is now largely gone, basically over. Immigration. If America is too open to people from all over the world, we risk losing our identity as a nation. What is that identity, pray tell? Republicans, majority agree, 64%. Democrats overwhelmingly disagree, 10% agree. And then all registered voters, only about a third of people agree with that, only about a third of people agree with that sort of extreme nationalism, anti-immigration statement. So here's the next statement. The Islamic religion is more likely than others to encourage violence among its believers. 71% of Republicans agree. A quarter of Democrats agree with that. Fun stuff. And 46% of all registered voters agree. So again, good news, a minority, but still a sizable minority, which is the bad news, agree with that statement. Again, this is a largely Christian country, the United States, although even that's declining, launching numerous wars at the same time. But okay. And meanwhile, the Republicans explicitly are calling for more of a Christo-fascist, Christian nationalist orientation, which really would put the stamp of the cross, on all of the things that the government does, yet somehow less violent. Whatever. This is a fun one. Most things in society can be pretty clearly divided into good and evil. A third of Democrats agree. Half of all registered voters agree. 2 out of 3 Republicans agree. Most things in society can be pretty clearly divided into good and evil. Okay. I don't know. Again, I'm still kind of worn out from talking to Democrats this morning, but yeah, it's structure and messaging accordingly, I guess, but that's kind of sad. U.S. policies should, but it does shed light on things like, you know, the Bush-Cheney years and the framing of the war on terror, things like that. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists, etc. Anyway, U.S. policies should try to keep it so America is the only military superpower. Now on this, everyone agrees. A majority of all groups agree. 53% of Democrats agree. America should be the only military superpower. 81% of Republicans overwhelmingly agree with that, and 2 out of 3 registered voters in general think that the U.S. should be the only military superpower. When I say that this is a very right-wing country, this kind of thing I'm talking about. All right, on to the next page. Most Republicans strongly disapprove of Biden's job performance. Far fewer Democrats strongly approve. So this is what we were saying. You know, the Republicans, for whatever reason, didn't have crushing victories in this election, but the support for Biden is tepid. You know, there's a lot more where there is support, it's critical, and I don't know. You know, both parties are hated. It's, like I said, just kind of a question of which one is more hated at any particular point. If you look at where's Joe Biden's approval rating? Let me dig that up. Biden, that would be in this folder. Biden approval. So the last time I snapshotted this was 2 months ago, 3 months ago. But I mean, there you go. The black line is approve. The red one, the bad one, is disapprove. At this time, disapprove was ahead by 15.5 points. So, I mean, yeah, they managed to not get killed in an election where there's very little support for what the party is doing. That should be a relief, but nothing to especially celebrate, and definitely nothing to draw major conclusions from, because it's a fluke. You know, people have insanely short memories in the United States, and the Republicans will manage to rehab themselves, probably with Democratic help. You know, how long can you run on January 6th? Not that January 6th wasn't disturbing, but it's like, that's going to wear off after a while. And people will go right back to supporting heinous shit again. We've just seen it decade after decade. Anyway, majorities in both parties are, quote, very concerned about prices of food, energy, and housing. So this is another thing like keeping the U.S. the only, or the biggest military in the world. This is another thing everybody agrees on. Price of food and consumer goods, the price of gasoline and energy, cost of housing. Majority are all concerned about that. And then less so, limited availability for some consumer products, employers being unable to find workers for hire, much higher Republican concern with that than Democratic or independent. How the stock market is doing, again, 24% of Democrats, 32% of independents concerned with the stock market, 43% of Republicans. So when we say that there's no difference between these parties, there is some difference, okay? I mean, these sort of classical holdovers, you know, you listening to this, you may be a Marxist, you've seen through the Democratic Party. A lot of people haven't, and these kind of traditions still play out somewhat. This doesn't mean that the party is actually concerned with these things or that the party is going to do anything about these things. But this is what's on the minds of people who support these parties. Finally, people who want to work being unable to find jobs, Republicans least concerned. Interestingly, though, they're far more concerned about the employers. Won't someone think of the employers being unable to find workers for hire? When it comes to the workers, people who want to work being unable to find jobs, Republicans 25%, Democrats 33%. So overall, there's very little concern. And independents too, 29%. So really the high watermark there is a third of any of these groups caring about people who want to work. So basically unemployment, you know, being unable to find jobs. Nobody fucking gives a shit in layman's terms. Finally, Democrats who give the economy a poor rating are expressing less certainty about who they will vote for. So even the Democrats who think that everything is in the shitter right now, which is an accurate assessment, are still voting Democrat. And okay, fair enough, because you don't think that the Republicans are, I mean, if you're limiting it to these two options. Fair enough. The Republicans were just in power, and yeah, they didn't really do anything either. If you're sort of leaning that way anyway, then you're, fairly certain the Republicans aren't going to fix anything. Anyway, this is, the state of U.S. electoral politics. But again, it does go beyond that to the people who support each of these parties. What is on their mind? So again, let's break this down. This is the percent of registered voters who say that they support or lean towards either the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate for the House of Representatives in their district. So among all registered voters who rate economic conditions in the country today as excellent or good, which is only 16%, only about 1 in 6 people are registered voters think that the economy is excellent or good. 73% of them are going to vote for the Democratic congressional candidate, and 13% of them for the Republican. And then 44% think the economy is only doing fair. Still more people voting Democrat than Republican, 48 to 33 for Congress. And the 39% who think that the economy is doing poor are 3 times more likely to vote for the Republican candidate. So I think that the economy is doing poorly. I would not rate it as fair. I think it's headed towards another 2008. Yet I would be in the 19% who are not sure. And, again, there's 13, 18, 19% not sure, for each of those 3 categories. Anyway, we'll leave it there. I'm going to get back into the chat now. But I did want to kind of review that. And that's about the last that I'm planning to do on these midterms. Again, checking my main takeaway. The Democrats are trying to really hunker down and tell themselves everything's going to be great in 2024 because, again, they happen to, catch some extremely lucky breaks coming off of 2020, and 2022 now is really still that same momentum of people being fed up with Trump, and Roe v. Wade really pushed a lot of people too far. But they're trying to say that this rewrites the book on U.S. politics. It clearly doesn't. All right. Illinois enshrined the right to organize in its constitution, first state to ever do it. That is, I haven't seen that mentioned anywhere. Thank you for mentioning that. I will look that up and see if we can cover that. See, this is what I mean. Where progress occurred, it happened despite the parties. It happened because of direct ballot measures. We're still at a stage convincing people that Democrats are our enemies, unfortunately. Yeah, and in some cases, still convincing people that Republicans are our enemies. The elections are still important to talk about, though, even if they're bourgeois. Yeah, I mean, it's something that happened. Again, we're not going to turn, secular talk and start making the entire show about it, but I think the week that it happens, it might be nice for people to at least know what happened. Yeah, these streams are converted into YouTube videos that any random person might see, like it or not. Elections are given a lot of focus. Yeah, people are interested. So, to a certain extent, you can't let it take over your channel. But to a certain extent, throwing in some videos people are just interested in. It's not that we're compromising the Marxist perspective on it, but just putting in a topic that people are interested in that I might not personally care about a super amount. I mean, it's relevant. So if you can't make your Marxist analysis relevant to what people are interested in, they're less likely to hear what you're talking about. Wow. Elon Musk fired all of Twitter Mexico, so literally nothing is getting done anymore. Interesting. Yeah, so I know many young people who are so politically apathetic to where they don't even care about revolution or anything beyond the two-party system. They just stare at it and then they just grow in apathy. I think that we need to give people more of an outlet for expressing, because the apathy is a kind of, it's not really apathy. People do care. People aren't happy. the apathy is a sort of, it's a response to it. It is an attempt to, I don't mean this. See, this is another reason that I don't like using cope, because coping is actually a healthy thing. Coping with stress is vital for actually living a happy life. Reducing it solely to a pejorative is, I think, not a good strategy for the culture. But anyway, I think people do attempt to cope with really bad conditions and a sense of powerlessness by pretending not to care, maybe even trying to convince themselves that they don't care. But, when there are major protests going on and people get involved in that, they can really come to life and come out of that shell. But then when there is a period of inactivity, so like I started doing S4A I made it as a Facebook page back in like summer of 2019. Didn't really start posting on it until maybe December 2019 or January 2020. Anyway, the Democratic primaries were going. There's a lot of momentum around that because of Bernie and stuff like that. There's a lot of people using the word socialism and looking up the word socialism. And then I started the YouTube channel in February, and we've been growing since then. And the Black Lives Matter George Floyd protests happened, and the pandemic hit. People were getting paid to stay home. And what was the first thing that they did? They started tearing the country apart. It's people are being worked to death, and they're exhausted, and they're also scared because this is a police state, and cops are allowed to like gun down people on the streets here, which is another thing that isn't the case in many other countries where there is a better culture of protest. But a lot was kind of happening that year, and it was really exciting to see more and more people getting interested in, oh, hey, can we actually reclaim power over our lives? And then, like I said, looking up the word socialism, what does it mean? You get into the big discussion of, well, SOCDEM say that it means this, and what's democratic socialism? And all of those are excellent opportunities for somebody who is a Marxist to get out there and say, well, here's what socialism is. Marx and Engels kind of wrote the book on it. They took all of the existing idealist socialism, utopian socialism, and they gave it a new materialist basis, and they criticized all the previous and current kinds of socialism, and they made this new system. Let's talk about that because it's got a great history, and a lot of people, thousands of people, got into that conversation just at S4A alone. A lot of momentum. Then what happens? Things go, quote, back to normal. People go back to work. The protests stop. Biden, wins the primaries, wins the election. Suddenly, people are just slinking back into line again. And everything goes quiet, and people get angry and upset, but they don't want to admit it. And they're too afraid to sort of do something because that sort of moment has passed. And we're still there. We're still in that moment where there's not a lot of activity. Again, I think that something like a left coalition probably has a better chance of sustaining that kind of momentum on a more permanent basis. They might not be able to do it constantly, but I think on a more permanent basis rather than every 4 years when there's a presidential election, to get more campaigns going, to get more of a network going, on and on. So again, it's people, like I said, it's like either supporting one of the parties in the two-party system or dropping out completely and, like you said, staring off into space and trying to convince themselves that they don't really care after all. That's not an excuse. You can't escape the system. You can't hide from the system. You have to agitate, educate, and organize to fight the system. Otherwise, it just keeps breaking down and destroying our lives in a cyclical fashion over and over again. Conditions get worse. Capitalists start wars, on and on and on. And then before you know it, you've wasted half your life waiting for conditions to get better on their own, and they're not going to. You need to get involved in that. And if there's one message that I have, it is that. That's why I say we're trying to improve, raise the bar on the left, improve the quality of the left, and get people not only with more of a sense of urgency about organizing, but doing it in better ways ultimately. We need that party. And I think, unfortunately, if it was as easy as just making it out of the conditions that we have, it would be made already. I think that there's probably intermediate steps at this point. I mean, again, union density is like 10.5% in the United States. It's really bad. And then even a lot of those unions are more like professional associations. They're not militant. They don't strike. They don't do much of anything. They're just sort of, you know, there's some minimal negotiations that go on behalf of the members, and that's really it. So yeah, the apathy, it's gotta, you know, it's interesting to me because there's been so many movements in the past that have been vehicles for this sense of alienation and the outrage and just people's dissatisfaction and discontent. And it's, you know, it's different obviously if we're talking about sort of white America versus not white America, and there's definitely different movements because there's different strata of, there's different concerns facing different communities, which are largely stratified by things like race and ethnicity and things like that in the United States. So I mean, but it seems like an enormous amount of discontent is welling up again. Obviously the Democrats, with the help of people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, are just trying to channel that into this dead-end Democratic Party, and then I guess sort of hypnotize people into thinking that they've actually accomplished something. You know, for example, they lose a branch of, at least one branch of government, and then try to hypnotize everybody into believing they actually won. Like what? No, and like, you know, oh no, we're not election deniers. We lost, but it was still a win. Let me tell you why. Like, fucking no, this is a cult at this point. Anyway, god damn it. You know, but it's where is this discontent gonna, you know, I'm looking for the manifestations of it, and things are so fragmented these days. You know, everybody's got their own little personal vanity account. I mean, and everybody's just sort of doing their own thing to the point of, you know, are mass movements even a thing at this point? Again, we saw major demonstrations, protests, expressions of discontent 2 years ago. They went away. You know, when is that going to happen again? Because seriously, every year that we just let pass inactive is a major loss. I don't know. The further these companies drop in market value, speaking about things like Amazon that lost $1 trillion in value, the larger the call for capitalist expansion by the bourgeoisie becomes. And yes, the capitalist losses are getting paid by the workers. In the decade leading up to 1929, the stock market had its greatest period of growth in that time, and then crisis. Yeah, it was the Roaring '20s. And then absolute calamity followed, and World War, and, you know, fascism, and all the other things that are emblematic of the crisis of capitalism. I definitely think we're in that period again. And, you know, 2008 was the warm-up, because all of the basic structural conditions underpinning 2008 have not changed. If anything, you know, the too big to fails are bigger. And, you know, the Democratic Party, for example, spotlight happening to be on them today, avoid them like nuclear waste. You know, they just want to convince you. They sing sweet songs, and they just want to, you know, like the Pied Piper, they just want to convince you everything's great. Hey, follow us, folks. Follow us. Everything's great. Oh, are you contending that us losing a branch of government isn't actually somehow like a 4D chess win, that isn't like a game-changing, you know, reality-shifting, amazing breakthrough? Well, you know, you must be, you know, go back to your MAGA meeting, I guess. It's a cult. It's a cult. You know, neither of these parties is capable of leading anything at this point. They're literally just twiddling their thumbs between now and the next crash, and their main job is to make sure that people don't organize independently. When that crash comes, we need to have our own organizations. We need to have our own coalitions. We need to have our own mass movement that's capable of addressing the next 2008. Their thing is they know it's coming. They don't want to do anything about it. The only thing they're really doing is trying to prevent us from organizing our own thing so that we can't attack them in their moment of extreme, profound weakness. You know, these crises are vulnerabilities for them. And sending people off to war is a vulnerability for them. And all these kinds of things. They want us, when the capitalists have their moment of vulnerability, they want to make sure that we're not organized enough to take advantage of that, to seize power of any kind. They want to keep the tables firmly turned towards them. The fact that people are overlooking COVID this much is wild to me. A lot of people don't know very much about medicine or biology, and they're listening to the public health authorities who are telling them it doesn't matter, just get boosted and you're good. And that is the strategy across the entire, U.S. allied imperialist world, basically almost the entire world at this point. So at least in the countries that have even been able to get their vaccines because of IP restrictions and whatever. I mean, there's countries still where the frontline healthcare workers haven't even gotten their first dose of the vaccine. So that's the situation that we're in. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's had like 19 booster shots, and he's like, the pandemic's over. Again, their job is to just keep us off balance. You have to decouple from them. Yeah, knowing the actual number of people who care about COVID it's shocking. So it's about 1 in 4. It's about 1 in 4. 3/4 of the country has been misled into thinking. I don't blame them individually, although some of the people, who are like calling it a hoax or whatever since the beginning, that was like 1/3 of the country. But and then another third and then some have also been convinced at this point that it's over. And again, we need people. This is what happens when you listen to Democrats, when you believe either Democrats or Republicans. They each have their brand of science denial, and they compete for which brand of science denial is better, whether it's COVID, whether it's climate change, whatever. But they're both science deniers. Science is throttled, is a point we make a lot. Science is throttled by capitalism. The profit motive / profit mandate throttles science, because if it doesn't contribute to those quarterly earnings, forget about it. It's in socialism that science is more broadly unshackled to actually do the thing, because you're not constrained by profits in that same way. Yep, imperialism and its manufactured consent are showing, definitely. The majority of Americans believe we can actually be invaded and taken over, lol. Yeah, I don't know what else you can say. Lol, indeed. So this is that kind of, I just feel like somewhat drained, partly because it's the second stream, did one of these yesterday, but partly also because it's just like horrifying, It's not a good situation. When we talk about organizing in a country like the United States, and you look at what your actual starting point is, it's like, when I say we need to bring together the left we have and then improve it, we really, really do. And we need to start exerting a much stronger influence on society. This was a point I made about Bernie Sanders a lot. As soon as he dropped out of the race, as soon as he rolled over for Joe Biden, his good friend Joe, Medicare for all, gone. It wasn't meant. Within 24 hours of Bernie Sanders dropping out of the race, Medicare for all was not mentioned on cable TV, on network TV, anywhere in major mass media again. Pretty much to this day. Even with COVID, the pandemic's been going on, whatever. It is important for left campaigns to exert this influence and to put these issues on the map, and to, again, fight for influence with the working masses. Because right now they're getting blasted by bourgeois propaganda constantly. And, there's a lot of well-meaning people who try to, they want to be informed. They watch the news, and they don't know what else to look at. And, they think that they're getting informed, and they don't want to be some chump that is just believing like absolute nonsense. But unfortunately, all the mainstream sources, you can get tidbits here and there, but again, especially for people who don't necessarily have the greatest education, particularly in the realm of critical thinking, they've never been trained in how to evaluate it, and so they listen to whatever mainstream news, the Democratic Party, whatever, and they think, well, it's better than those other guys, and this is probably closer to true, and, you know, this is sort of where it ends. So I don't fault the people who really don't know better and are actually making some effort to, you know, have an evidence-based worldview. That's laudable, that's admirable, that's a good thing. But, you know, it's not good enough in terms of the content that's being put out is still misleading a lot of people. They don't cover the stories that need to be covered. And, you know, we're trying to make up for some of those deficits on social media that we can, but it's still very sort of against the grain. We need to be bringing these messages into, you know, the billboards, into mass media spaces, and, you know, let the science deniers try to contend with it and, you know, fight us over the fact. You know, Democrats like nothing more than only having to contend with Republicans. The 1% donors that fund both parties would like nothing more than to keep the locus of the political discussion between those two parties, you know, dumb and dumber, bad and worse, and they never have to reach any higher than that. And that means, you know, miseducating an awful lot of people who look to these sources, again, many just not knowing better, and that's all they have time for. We have to be out there doing that. So, again, I think that, you know, building the coalition, getting the parties out there in people's faces, you know, putting our messaging in front of people, it can really work. It can really be powerful. And you're going to help people in the process. People don't want to live in ignorance. You know, I mean, a lot of people would like to know more of the truth, if not, you know, sort of the whole truth about everything. There's a lot of room for leftward movement here, is what I'm trying to say. And we as the left in the U.S. are not currently taking full advantage of that. Is good and evil framing anti-dialectical? I really believe that the 1% are evil. So evil, good and evil, these are, I mean, kind of religious terms. In more of like a broad sociological sense, when you talk about norms, folkways, laws, mores, you know, basically the moral standards and what's considered valued, or you know, what's considered, you know, moral or immoral in a society. Something like an evil, you know, like not sending a thank you note after getting a birthday present might be considered by some people impolite, but no one would consider it evil. I mean, evil is a term that is relative, but it's generally reserved for things that people consider to be, you know, the highest level of immorality. So, I mean, it doesn't have an objective meaning other than, you know, it means the worst thing that people can do in whatever the sort of moral framing that you're using is. Is it anti-dialectical? In the sense that it can be a thought stopper, I guess you could say that. I mean, there's things that I would consider evil by my own moral framework. I don't think that it's anti-dialectical. It's a shorthand for saying that violates everything that I consider to be, you know, decent, just, fair, you know, considerate of other people's suffering and existence and challenges in life. Is it anti-dialectical? I don't know. I don't think... Again, where are you going with this question? With that said, I feel it is dehumanizing language being used to demonize our trans, black, disabled, immigrant comrades far more readily than the billionaire class. Yeah, I mean, so as far as being dehumanizing language, that's kind of what I meant about it being a thought stopper. So like I said, it's shorthand for something that you want to label as highly immoral, like highest level of immorality. And for some people, there is no you know, need to engage with it further than that, which, I mean, that would be anti-dialectical. But I mean, I think in general, the question in the poll was, do you feel that most things in society can be summed up as like, either good or evil? The answer to that question is no. I mean, there's plenty of things that do not fall into just sort of like an inarguable good or an inarguable evil. Most things are just really neither. And so, you know, I would definitely not agree with that statement in any way. The fact that so many people do agree with it, I think, shows a very, you know, again, lack of critical thinking, very limited analysis of things, and a tendency to sort of sweep away questions, you know, in a very dismissive way. So yeah, and you know, when it's applied to people, yeah, it can be dehumanizing. Sure. Hopefully that's helpful. And I did see where you were going with that. An issue with the good and evil thing is only if you take it as the conclusion to the issues in society. The conclusion should be around class interest. I mean, yeah, it's these are moral concerns. Obviously, if you're trying to do any serious analysis of something, it's not just like, is it bad or is it good? Like, that's trying to approach any question like that is just extremely limited thinking. Apathy is indeed cultivated by bourgeois propaganda. They need people to believe that capitalism is the end of history. Yeah, this is what I was saying. They want, like, their job is to convince you that you can't do anything. Well, in the case of U.S., you know, the major capitalist political parties, and then let's not forget the libertarians, who are the largest, quote, third party. They're the largest party other than Democrats or Republicans. And guess what? They're also neoliberals. They literally want more of the same system, but in an even more concentrated dose than the Democrats and Republicans are going to present it to you. So, but yeah, the whole purpose of these parties is to make people feel like we can't do anything on our own, to exactly spread those feelings of hopelessness, and, you know, you got to leave it up to the, quote, adults in charge, in other words, the servants of capital. And yeah, absolutely. So that when a crisis does come around, we're not equipped to do anything about it because we haven't been organizing, because we've been beaten down psychologically like that. There's a condition called learned helplessness. It's a psychological phenomenon. It's when people basically are put in a situation where nothing they do seems to make any difference, but it is adverse. So, like, an example is an experiment where it's highly unethical and distressing, but, you know, like if an animal is placed in an electrified cage that shocks every so often, no matter where the animal stands, they get shocked. And what's observed is called learned helplessness. They just lay down and give up because they try and it just turns out bad anyway. That is what the system, we can maybe even move beyond the term apathy to learned helplessness. That is what the system is absolutely trying to cultivate in people. It's no matter what you do, you can't do anything. A better world is not possible. Independent organizing is not possible. These are all the messages that they put out there. Obviously, as Marxists, we could not be any more opposed to that. It is the historical duty of the working class to end capitalism. And not only can it be done, it has been done, and it must be done again the world over. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. Hang on. All right, thanks for bearing with. About halfway through the stream at this point. The good-evil question wasn't really a good question because some things are objectively good and bad and some things require nuance. No, I think it was a good question because I agree with you in your statement, but they were saying, do you think most things are good, bad questions? And like half of people said yes. So, yeah. I don't think it comes even remotely close to most things. So, anyway, no, but I was reflecting on all of this, and it is, when you look at the elections and the political system overall, it's just disgusting. And, it's good to get this out and talk about it because I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted with the learned helplessness that is cultivated in people, that people are put in conditions that they really feel like they can't change over and over until they do give up. That's learned helplessness. And it's disgusting. The exploitation that happens on a daily basis, the war, everything else, it really truly is disgusting. And it's out of this disgust that I started, doing this channel and started doing other efforts that I've been involved in over time, etc. Eventually, that disgust can be a motivating force. And, every 2 years, 4 years in different amounts, we're reminded of, what the system offers, which is really nothing to the average working person. It's something we have to organize against as a whole. And, yeah, that sense of disgust, it's uncomfortable to feel. It does require, confrontation. We have to confront it and move through it. On the other side of that disgust, are some positive feelings about the world that is possible if we break away from this. But, yeah, really, really dark clouds of the system itself. Anyway, next comment. S4A, what do you think of the phenomenon of progressive ballot measures being passed in otherwise red states? RBN was using RBN, Revolutionary Blackout, will use anything as an excuse to say, see, we can work with conservatives. They will say that about literally anything. A bird can fly across the sky and they'd be like, see, evidence that we can work with conservatives. Day turns to night. See, evidence that we can work with conservatives. I would disregard that. They're not a channel worth following, in my opinion. We've covered them a little bit. Yeah, good. I'm glad you're not convinced. Continuing, I think it's a matter of making the actual issues at stake easier to understand rather than the identity of Republican versus Democrat or the individual personalities of the people running. I mean, there are certain issues that have what we would consider basically right-wing. People who are right-wing on most issues, and we don't want to work with them on those issues, will support, for example, Medicare for all. A majority of people in this country are to the left of the healthcare status quo. And that includes people who are right-wing on many issues, who we don't want to form a broad political coalition with because what they're going to be bringing is lots of right-wing bullshit. But on a specific single issue, if the support's there, yeah, and you're dealing with a vote-based system, then yeah, rally their votes. But it doesn't mean you suddenly abandon all other principles and start a political coalition with them. They're going to be undermining it at every step. So yeah. Next comment responding to that. It's a dishonest way to make the claim we can work with conservatives, lol. The reality is there are tons of people who think that they are conservative in those states when they really aren't. They just don't like the Democrats. But we got a troll in here advertising by viewers. There's a strategy. And even if they were conservatives, the goal should be the goal should be to pull them to the left and spread class consciousness, not form coalitions with them. So in other words, MAGA people, whatever, they're welcome to stop being MAGA people. Right-wingers are welcome to shed their false consciousness. I mean, to the extent that they are actually working people in the first place. Some of these people aren't proletarians or they're like wealthy petty bourgeois. In that case, they're probably going to keep doing what they're doing. To the extent that they're working class people who just have, really bad false consciousness and are supporting a lot of capitalist bullshit, they're welcome to stop doing that. In fact, we would like to see more and more people, not do that. The problem is they keep insisting in many cases that they need to hang on to their bigotry of many different kinds because that is, quote, a working class view when it's not. They learned it from fucking Fox News. And they try to bring that into the movement. So again, they're welcome to shed their nationalism, they're welcome to shed their racism, they're welcome to shed their sexism, they're welcome to shed their heterosexism, on and on. They're welcome to do all that shit. We want them to. We would like everybody to do that and unite and do this thing that we need to do. But what people like RBN and the extreme opportunists, basically, well, now fascists like Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore has promoted fascists like Giorgia Meloni on a show, just out and out, how is that fascist? Well, I don't know, Jimmy. I mean, we did entire streams about this. Maybe she's been in fascist political parties her entire adult life for the past 30 years and is still railing on about immigration and, anti-LGBTQ stuff. How is that fascist? Well, I don't know. She's only been doing it her whole fucking life using classic fascist talking points. If you can't put two and two together about how that's fascist, then just admit you're trying to run PR for her and convince people that what is obviously fascist right in front of their face isn't. So that's the kind of people that we're talking about here. It's extreme opportunism just veering directly into fascism that are trying to convince you that, like right-wing chuds are, quote, the real Marxists or whatever. It's just absolute garbage. So anyway, Jimmy Dore, quote, progressives that are starting to call themselves Marxists, but in reality, they're just campist, speaking of, the last thing you want to do is start getting into all kinds of debates with these people. You don't, quote, convert people, okay? You build mass movements for various social causes that interest working people, and then people join those movements, and then they either work harmoniously with the movement or they try to wreck it. You don't convert people, you don't debate them out of being a Nazi or whatever. You build movements to fight fascism, to fight capitalism, to fight imperialism, to fight, for tenant rights, to fight for workers' rights, on and on. That's what you do. And as people join those movements, they become active participants in the struggle for socialism. We don't, quote, convert people. So anyway, speaking of this entire crew, here's an alert that there is a known accused sex pest back on the loose. And it is none other than everyone's least favorite. Yeah, there you go. You're not even going to believe this fucking clip. And I'm talking about Caleb Maupin, head of CPI, which had to shut down recently due to apparently credible allegations of sexual exploitation by its leader, Caleb Maupin. So he made his comeback video after slinking off for a couple of months. And a mighty fine 2 months they were. Nobody wants Caleb Maupin back. Stay the fuck down. But anyway, Sal of the Red Army did this thread. So first of all, we have some screen grabs here. This is a real clip. Nobody edited this. Brace yourself.
I would have preferred to keep this private, but it is now all over the internet. Now, spanking isn't just my deep, dark personal secret. It's America's deep, dark secret.
No, it's your deep, dark secret. And it's not about the, spanking. That was the thing. He was consistently getting organization members and other contacts that allegedly, he was calling together for political purposes for his, quote, Marxist, organization. These people are actually just LaRouche. It's Lyndon LaRouche Movement, Schiller Institute, that's LaRouche affiliated think tank. People with elements of neo-fascist Alexander Dugin philosophy. By the way, there's a video we're going to be uploading from a Russian channel. There's a guy, the channel is Agitprop, I forget the guy's name. Anyway, you'll see it when I upload it. He went through some old newsletters from like 1990, 91, 92, 93, and it was stuff Dugin was writing about fascism, and it's unequivocally, pushing a very clear fascist worldview. Very little interpretation is needed. But anyway, that's all these people are. They're not Marxist. They're just neo-fascists of the LaRouche and Dugin stripe. Anyway, he did this like 26-minute video. But, so, basically, everyone stay alert, because this guy has been roping people, getting people together for, quote, political purposes, and then basically starting conversations about spanking because he gets off on it. And, I mean, that's sort of weird. It's not that people were offended by the spanking. It's the fact that, you're exploiting people. And this went down to, like, getting people fired from their jobs and then getting them dependent on him. And, bad stuff. We covered this a few months ago when this came out. At the time, a number of people from his organization came out. So he released this video, of which that clip was just a part. You can't make this up. Just go away. Just go the fuck away. You should really be happy you didn't end up in jail or something. Just leave it here. Anyway, the first version of this like 26+ minute video included the revelation that somebody had accused Infracell of rape. So I'm not sure if this is the only one. I'm not sure even somebody had the screenshot of it here. There's a statement. So basically, Maupin said this isn't even logistically possible. So it couldn't have happened. And then he took the video down and then edited that out because apparently Infracell was not happy about, Caleb calling attention. Obviously, there's a video a lot of people are going to be watching. I'm stunned. I'm stunned. But anyway, he was not happy that Caleb was calling attention to the fact that somebody had a rape allegation against him. But anyway, here's another clip of Infracell talking about how he and Samira Khan knew about Maupin being a sexual predator.
Let me tell you what happened. So we got all the accusations. Me, Samira, they told us all the things Caleb was guilty for. Now here's what we said, and we were honest. We were like, okay, now that we think of it, what Caleb did was wrong. But here's the thing. You have to put him on trial, and you have to do it internally, or else you're not getting our support. We're not going to stand behind you with this shit. Now we will stand behind you if you do the following. Make it internal.
Yeah, so this is what the church does. It's what every type of cult that wants to create an atmosphere where sexual assault and exploitation is perpetrated, you, quote, handle it internally. So that's what they knew about this, and they were advocating for it to be handled quietly, discreetly. Here's another one of, this is not directly related to the, Maupin or anything, but coming out shilling for the Boogaloo Boys.
Hey, militia movement people. Hey, Boogaloos. All one. I'm a fucking...
Yeah. So basically having, full Jimmy... I'll get this... go back to the Maupin thing. Having the Jimmy Dore moment of like, hey, let's do the Boogaloo Boy unity. Yeah, let's take a right-wing libertarian militia and let's just start, calling it communist or whatever. They literally exist as, anti-communists, fascists. That's their whole thing. But, let's start calling that communist instead. These are just fascists. Again, it's LaRouche, Schiller Institute, Dugin-affiliated flavors of neo-fascism with some other shit thrown in there. But anyway, Sal did, and I commend Sal for this, a breakdown of the Maupin video, because there's no way in hell I was going to watch the whole thing. So he then goes on to victim blame a woman experiencing domestic violence and spousal abuse for relapsing on drugs after being subjected to his sexual proclivities. And this is, if I recall, there was one of the accusers said that they relapsed on heroin because of the situation. Maupin apologizes for a lack of self-control. The last scene is just someone recognizing him in person as the celebrity that he is. Like, obviously, no one is going to be recognizing Caleb Maupin, clearly an actor. He said that he opened doors for these people at the Tucker Carlson show, and if it was a cult, it would have been all about him, but he opened these doors and they fell on their faces. So, if it was a cult, why did the organization close again? Oh yeah, because Maupin was the only one with any actual like ownership of or control over the organization. Literally with him gone, there was no one to run it, so it folded that day. So he's basically saying that the abuse he did was fine because these people weren't bright shining college students. I guess they weren't wearing the right suit jacket or whatever. They were, instead heroin addicted prostitutes and therefore of less value. So I opened these doors for these sad, lonely, helpless, bitter people, and they spat in my face, and they will be sorry in exposing me. You've exposed yourselves. I'm resilient, according to Caleb. He said, back in my day at the diner, times were different. You could really spank your subordinate like you can't do now in this culture. He said, think of how this will hurt the anti-imperialist fight to open the internet and see his sex pest allegations. He called them wreckers and tried to blacklist the people who came forward, saying they will only destroy you, Lamau, oh my god. And they edited Hunter Biden into the video with sex music. He says it's pure malarkey that these people have a real reason to be mad. He then goes on to blame BreadTube for Dugan's death. He thinks that if you read the entire document and not just the text messages that they snapshotted or whatever, that he wrote, you would think differently. He said, do you think I would do all this just to be a weird sex guy? That's so weird of you to say. You should be ashamed. I can't believe you just had to do this, he says. So when you actually look at his politics, yes, I think it is plausible that you would adopt these kinds of horrific neo-fascist politics for the purpose of creating a sex cult rather than that you thought they were just really good politics. I think it's more likely that you did it to create a sex cult than that you thought that they were honestly good politics, because they're honestly terrible. Anyway, I think that's all we'll be covering of that, but I just did want to mention that happened. On many people not knowing about biology and science and our situation about COVID, we only have a 79% literacy rate. I'm not saying they're the same people, but there is a serious lack of education. Yeah. These people calling COVID a hoax indeed do have blood on their hands. Yeah, actually that's a really good point. So people like Dorr and RBN and these other people, they remind me of Democrats and their obsession to reaching out to conservatives. And it's funny because, it's like people would make fun of Jimmy Dore, Jimmy Dore would make fun of like Chuck Schumer, saying, for every one voter that we lose in the Rust Belt, we'll pick up 2 or 3 disaffected Republicans in the cities. And obviously that didn't work. They're trying to do the exact same thing as, quote, leftists. So, excellent point. It's just, it's opportunism, and it's more than that. It's an unwillingness, I think, especially in Jimmy Dore's case. What he wants to do is make money and feed his ego. And, he tried being a comedian. He honestly is not very funny. But he had, this talent for doing politics, such as it is. He had a relative talent for doing politics. And so he's on that now. He wants to make money. He has a gigantic ego that is just constantly screaming for comfort. So audience capture is one way that I've heard it put. is it audience capture, or is it just, I mean, pandering to the absolute easiest messaging, non-confrontational stuff, you know, taking just the easiest positions, never really having to take firm stands, like telling your audience to fuck off on when your audience is doing racist shit or sexist or nationalist or, you know, any other kinds of reactionary shit. Will you stand up to your audience? I mean, he has never done that. In fact, has done really quite the opposite. Let these people know they're very comfortable. He's very comfortable with them in his audience, and they're welcome there. That's been the message consistently in 100 different ways. Yeah, RBN used to be called the Fred Hampton leftists until they got sued by Fred Hampton's family. Yeah, they do also take Caleb Maupin seriously. They had Jackson Hinkle on promoting MAGA communism recently, etc. Yeah. One of the RBN idiots called me a liberal for saying that Jimmy Dore was responsible for a lot of anti-vax propaganda. Absolutely true, he is. Which ended up hurting communities of color and the poor in general the most. They are Dore puppets and serve the petty bourgeoisie. Yep. Saw an article in tagesschau.de saying that pension estimators are optimistic because lots of money has been saved thanks to COVID mortality. Capitalists want to get rid of as many elderly and disabled people as possible. Yes. And yeah, if we're going to do anything as good and evil, socialism good, capitalism evil. Absolutely. Yeah, that's another thing. The more that people outright die or have their lifespans shortened by COVID, is less pension retirement money you got to pay out. So you basically get people to work until they're 65 or older, then they die at 70. You know, that's it. Just surplus value, no payback. Yeah, so this is another point. Not to make Bernie or the squad, I mean, I think in this stream alone, I've criticized Bernie and the squad, but the people staging those, like the AOC confrontation, and I think Ilhan Omar. Also, there's been some, like, you know, they had like a town hall or something, and then some kind of crazed activists. There's somebody I know who was like, what is going on with the people yelling at AOC? Like, this person was not an AOC fan, but they thought that the person, like, screaming at her just came off as, like, deranged. Those are LaRouche people. Do not support them. Oh, but also, Caleb Maupin's, while I was looking at his return briefly, the three people he retweeted most recently prior to that, one, Kim Iverson, who was promoting LaRouche talking points about the land bridge. Number two was the Accused Rapist Podcast Grifter Party, aka the Movement for a People's Party, who are also aligned with Jimmy Dore. They're trying to get Jimmy Dore to run for president. Same kind of opportunist fascist crap. And some random LaRouche person who's promoting a LaRouche political candidate. So that's firmly, again, it's neo-fascism aligned with LaRouche, Schiller, and Dugan, and also, you know, taking smatterings of ideology from other sources as well, but the LaRouche connection is very strong. So yeah, when you see those staged confrontations, well, I mean, staged, whatever, the confrontations of the squad in those, like, town halls or whatever, those are LaRouche people. And whether or not you agree with, like, a word that they say, that's not something you want to be supporting. I mean, don't get me wrong, AOC is, like, did some of Jimmy Dore's, I kind of take that as the last gasp of Jimmy Dore's authentic progressivism. You know, if you look at older Jimmy Dore, 2015, 2016, there's an element of sleaze, but like the overall thing is genuinely more progressive. It was before he had the big falling out with Cenk and TYT, and he got this massive chip on his shoulder that, like, he needs to build a bigger audience and, you know, really show Cenk and all that kind of stuff. Before all that, I think he still carried some smattering of actual progressivism, one of the manifestations of that. I think that Jimmy Dore sincerely cares about Medicare for all. He may have completely grifted now into out and out supporting people, at least passively, like Georgia Maloney and, the trucker convoy and the avalanche of anti-vax stuff and COVID denial stuff that he put out. I mean, he's completely destroyed his name. But I think one of the last gasps of his actual former progressivism was force the vote. He had an actual point there. Unfortunately, like the next week or so, that was when he moved into promoting the Boogaloo libertarian militia, and that was the end of it for me completely. But yeah, I mean, force the vote. It was the last opportunity to sort of try to use some leverage to get Medicare for all going. It could have worked. They didn't do it, and they were like, no. We have a plan for Medicare for all. Trust us, trust us, trust us. Well, it's been almost 2 years. What have they done? Nothing. Have they even mentioned it since then? No. So, I mean, okay, fair point on that, but we also don't want to be organizing around LaRouche, the trucker convoys, and like the Wexit fascist movement in Western Canada. We don't want to be organizing around that stuff. So again, I take that as the last gasp of like Jimmy Dore's dying progressivism. He's a full-on fascist now, in my opinion. In a brief segment I heard on CNN over the midterms is, quote, the fringes are pushing moderates away. It really makes no sense at all. Moderates are like the most likely people to get involved in the system. Like people who are just like, oh, the system just needs tweaks. I mean, those are moderates, right? That's not pushing anyone away. Like, I don't get it. Anyway, our goal is not to sanitize our language to appeal to moderates, but to educate them and bring them to our side where they are no longer moderates. Yeah. Yeah, actually, for that reason, a lot of the rhetoric about like, oh, they call me like a radical, I'm just for common sense. This is me at least, but I don't really like that kind of language. If we're actually serious about organizing for an eventual revolution, I mean, you can say a revolution is common sense. I don't think that most people would characterize it that way. When people think of common sense, they think of, I don't know, somebody reading a newspaper like over breakfast and like chuckling sensibly to themselves. Like, I tend not to like those. I agree. A lot of fascists aren't aware that they are fascists. Yes and no. I think a lot of them are, but they will deny it up and down, and they don't want you to realize that they're fascists, that's for sure. We played that video. It's like a little skit, about a 2-minute long skit, set in Nazi Germany, where there's like a Nazi officer walking by, and some guy like leaning against a wall says, fascist. And the guy's like, excuse me? The Nazi officer's like, excuse me? What did you just call me? It's like, you're a fascist. Or he calls him a Nazi or whatever. And he's like, excuse me, where do you think you get off calling me a Nazi? He's like, well, you are a Nazi. You're wearing that armband. And he's like, insulting an officer, huh? But this is the thing. Yeah, they won't own it. Nobody wants to be called a fascist. Very few, anyway. You can find a few. But, people don't want to admit that that is what the system comes to. Advanced capitalism is imperialism. The ideology of imperialism is fascism. There's a process of fascization. We covered this a while back. It doesn't, turn into fascism overnight, but that's just where this ends up. And people who want to hang on to and defend capitalism may not like that, but this is, and so hence all the denial, but this is where it ends up. Yeah, so on the topic of being beaten into doomerism, my partner is this way. She acknowledges that both parties are capitalist trash, but always tells me that a socialist or communist future is impossible. Okay, that's like your opinion. I mean, that's your belief. Is it supported by evidence? And at a minimum, could we do more organizing to create a more vigorous anti-fascist left coalition, a more vigorous anti-imperialist left coalition? Could we at least do that? Or are you going to say that's impossible too? This is learned helplessness again. I always give her the example that Lenin didn't think he would see revolution, and then He actually led one. He didn't give up. We must not either. I mean, you can give up, but what's the point? What's the point of giving up? What do you gain? All you're going to do is assume a passive role in a system you've already acknowledged needs to die. Can you really live with that? Do you really think that that sort of cognitive dissonance you're going to try to pull off is going to work out for you? Or do you think that you're going to wind up coming back to it again someday and you'll just have lost a lot of time in the meantime? You know? So you can like live in denial for the rest of your life because you've already realized capitalism needs to go. Or, you can give up on it temporarily and eventually come back to it. No, just stay with it. Just stay with it. If nothing else, how do you want to spend your life? Do you want to spend your life organizing to fight and resist the system, whether we win or not? It's definitely possible. But whether we succeed or not, do you want to at least try? Or do you want to somehow pretend you can live without doing that? I can't. I can't live without doing that. I noticed the learned helplessness during the trucker convoy in Canada. Most people just raised their hands and begged the government to fix it instead of counter-protesting. Yeah, so I mean, direct action gets the goods. People have to relearn this lesson and then not forget it. We have to help teach it to them. We aren't really taught what fascism is in the US, so lots of people are just in the dark. We're just taught about the Nazis and maybe Italy. I never really learned about Italy myself. And that fascism ended in World War II. Yeah, you're correct. This is why, we say that the anti-fascism of capitalists is extremely shallow. As soon as World War II ended, a lot of the Allies basically took on Nazi Germany, the defeated remnants of Nazi Germany, in the Cold War. So, like, they fought in the inter-imperialist conflict of World War II, which was only partially an inter-imperialist conflict. World War II was also an attempt to destroy the Soviet Union again. So that was part of it. But it was also Germany trying to compete by other means, as we say, war is business by other means, with the UK and France and England and so on. And, after they settled that score, they joined forces on some of the other purposes, such as defeating communism. So, yeah, it's extraordinarily shallow. You can't believe liberals, capitalists, generally, when they say that they're anti-fascist. It's always in a very self-serving, opportunistic way, in a very limited way. They're not opposed to fascism. They just have quarrels with these other types of capitalists. Eventually, though, they will work out their differences with these other capitalists, and then they will turn on us, the socialists. That's how it works. This was the big failure of the Popular Front in the U.S. CPUSA bought into that in a big way, that, we're going to, ally with and there were other forces encouraging this as well. But basically, a lot of the actual left in the U.S. thought that after World War II, socialists would be rewarded for having helped to defeat the Nazi menace, fascism generally. What actually happened? McCarthyism. So having settled their differences with the other capitalists, the winning capitalists immediately sided with them and turned on us. So never trust that. Never trust that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we're given an extremely just piss-poor understanding of fascism. We've done a lot of videos on fascism on the channel. Back to like around S4A live streams like 48, 59, 48, 49, 50, thereabouts. We did a bunch, including the Paul Sturm article, The Class Basis of Fascism, talking about Jimmy Dore, Giorgia Meloni, things like that. And socialists need to learn more about fascism for sure. Besides neoliberal, neoconservative, enshrined capitalism as never-ending, let's not forget there are conspiracy theorists who claim that the powerful are put in place by God or Satan to usher in the literal end of the world. These are actually held beliefs by fascists today. Yeah, this is a sort of Christian theocratic apocalyptic end times people. It's like the same right-wing Christians who actually are very anti-Semitic and hate Jewish people support, some of them, the state of Israel because, I mean, not only it's just, you know, an imperialist ethno-state and all that kind of stuff, and, you know, they like the racism, but they see it as a sign of, or like a prerequisite for the end times. This is more of some of the extreme fringe that believe stuff like that. I mean, most of the rest of this stuff is just, you know, it's capitalist ideology, just that is propagated for the purpose of perpetuating capitalism. You know, getting people to believe that stuff means that they will perpetuate capitalism. So anyway, people backed by big money to invent flat earther stuff, like, you know, globe skeptic modes of thought. I have to say, globe skeptic modes of thought is a very sophisticated way of saying flat earther. And hatred and suspicion of NASA as an org which has photographic evidence of the earth dying, anti-science. Yeah, I mean, fascism is anti-intellectual in many ways. We can see this as a manifestation of that anti-intellectualism. Stuff to cover the asses of the genocidal, ecocidal bourgeoisie. Yeah. So, another comment. It's less about socialism being possible, it's actually inevitable. Historically speaking, we've always had revolutions as a response to poor socioeconomic conditions. The decision is whether you want to have an appropriate alternative to barbarism, let's say fascist decay, and collapse. The thing is, most people are historically displaced. They couldn't chronologically tell you the events of the last 10 years, let alone 100. Yeah, so this contributes to the sense of false consciousness. I think historically displaced, I'm going to make a note of that. That's actually probably a good sort of topic to do some thinking about, which I haven't done enough on. But yeah, I will often mention the 2000s. You know, in the U.S., the Bush-Cheney years basically were the 2000s with a little bit of stuff on either end cap. But people act like they don't even, they never happened, like they didn't exist. I agree, people are kind of living in a free-floating, well, if you will, end-of-history state. I mean, on the internet, past, present, and future are constantly colliding, and it is disorienting. I do think people are very historically displaced, disoriented. So yeah. But yeah, you're right that capitalism will go into more and more crises. It does take an organized proletariat to end it and create socialism. And this is the part where, you know, the capitalists are trying to absolutely prevent us from even thinking that it's possible for us to do that. Hence, again, another reason I'm trying to run this channel and clue people in on that history and you know, the philosophy, theory behind the international communist movement, because, yeah, there are definitely alternatives out there. True, as an American, I grew up not knowing much about Marxism and communism. Even when I did, I was told don't read it since it's in the same vein as Mein Kampf, and I'm thankful for S4A and other Marxist channels teaching me about Socialism 101. Well, good, I'm glad you listened. Thanks to you for listening. Not everybody listens, you know. I'm glad it's helpful, and I'm glad that you actually listened to it. But, yeah, I mean, saying that Americans grow up not knowing much about Marxism or communism is, you know, accurate, also a gigantic understatement. But yeah, for sure. It seems Americans can't admit they're wrong, or especially can't say, I don't know. Yeah, everybody's got to have like a fucking opinion about everything. And they rarely qualify it as like, you know, I don't know much about this, but I know one thing and blah, so take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, or just, if you don't know anything, I don't know. You know, Caleb Maupin has no shame, honestly. Maupin said he's bringing CPI back. Who the fuck would want to join? Good question. Good question. All cops? I don't know. Yeah, who but a cop would want to join that at this point? Who but a cop or other, you know, spanking enthusiasts or, like, no honest person would want to join that org at this point. Yeah, whichever federal or private organization making him do this is where he gets his spankings. Holy shit. He is a textbook cult leader. These are all comments. Infracell did a stream talking about Maupin recently, and it was very funny. Maupin was in the chat begging Infracell to forgive him. Boy, that's weird. Yeah, there's a reason I don't I don't watch that, and I don't recommend watching it. Those couple of clips that shared were things other people clipped. So Infracell seems to change his ideology every other week. Well, can we say that this is fascist eclecticism? You know what I'm trying to say. Yeah, Two-Hole Haas is a literal fascist and also in the LaRouche cult, which to me is not even as respectable as just being a regular fascist. It's somehow even worse. It's like more embarrassing. Did he threaten to sue Maupin? Oh, this is interesting. I still have an MP3 of an interview I did with Maupin about 10 years ago when he was in an ML group just before he had to leave it. So was this Workers' World Party? Oh, yeah. Actually, good point there. Just to clarify for everyone, the, quote, libertarian character of the Boogs is a meme. Well, yes and no. Anyway, yeah, Boogaloo is code for race war or second civil war, which they think would have a racial component. So yeah, you're correct. But it's saying that the libertarian character of it is a meme, I would not agree. I think it's just that libertarianism is crypto-fascism. So we agree. We agree. I would just say that no, that is what libertarian means in the first place. But yeah, you're right. That's what Boogaloo's about. So that's who Infracell is calling to rally there. And as Jimmy Dore was desperately trying to sell to his audience, I did a video on that. Jimmy Dore's Boogaloo blunder, back when that happened like a year and a half ago. He's an opportunist. I think this is talking about Infracell. He also has Maupin is an opportunist and has a huge amount of paranoia going on in his head, just like LaRouche. Sad. Yeah. I mean, would be sad. You know, he's now become perpetrator, and things change. He's no longer just a victim. He's a perpetrator, and yeah. It's the Kevin Spacey defense pretending rape allegations against him are about him being gay. It's simple misdirection. Yeah, it's not about the spanking. It's about the fact that you fucking exploited people, according to the people who are in your organization. Yeah, I would love to hear that interview, Pinko, if you want to, like, send me a link to the MP3. How has Jimmy Dore not been accused of anything yet? That's a good question. Oh yeah, there was the Anna Kasparian incident. I don't know if it was more than one thing. I remember that in the. It's hazy to me now, but yeah, I remember her accusing him of inappropriate conduct on the set, and him defending it at enormous length. But yeah, how has he not had his sort of spanking moment yet? Don't know. No one intelligent ever called Infracell smart. I remember he had a video responding to S4A for criticizing him when he said that America is socialist. America's not fucking socialist. Like I remember making that video. It was like, the title of it is "We Are Already Living in Socialism plus America." And he was trying to say, he was confusing the Marxist description of capitalism, which is just a basic description of capitalism, as, you know, capitalism starts out with production at a very small scale, isolated individual shops, and then over time it gets consolidated and the production takes on a mass or social character where an individual product will be handled by many different workers and maybe even at multiple workshops. So production becomes socialized in that sense, but it doesn't make it socialism. It was like such an insane error to make. Like, I was still at that point, I hadn't listened to him, but I had just heard so many people confidently proclaiming that, like, he's this new fucking lay it on the line authority about what is Marxism. I think they also really, really skewed the discussion on China as well around that same time. And boy, were they just coming out so hard, so aggressively at anybody who opposed them. And it was somewhat bewildering at first. And then as the dust settles, we see they're just a bunch of LaRouche neo-fascist clowns who think that the United States is fucking socialist. I mean, it's like insane gibberish. And I, eventually started responding to some of that. And then, yeah, so anyway, the video response was that it was all like ad hominems. It was like, that women do not find this person attractive. He probably is, he has a socially undesirable appearance. Like, yeah, just all these like ad homs. Meanwhile, he's a quote alpha male. He's probably this, he's probably that. He then threw a tantrum because of a speech-to-text playing in the background and threatened to end the stream. He's a freaking moron and isn't worth anyone's time. I think that more and more people have figured that out. And I think that the whole LaRouche connection is just accelerating that dramatically. So, yeah. Saying that the victim isn't an angel. There we go. Saying the victim isn't an angel is what right-wing nutjobs say to justify police brutality. Regardless of what the suspect did, that doesn't justify the police being the judge, jury, and executioner. Well, it's also textbook sexual harassment. It's like, look at what she was wearing. She asked for it. It's all that same stuff. It's like, well, they're not innocent either. No. They didn't exploit you sexually. You exploited them. That's the issue. The part that pissed me off the most with Maupin, again, having to like have this discussion in an ostensibly socialist space with people who are still like RBN, I think has become more bold about calling themselves Marxists and stuff. And it's just like, shut that shit down when you see it. Don't let them get away with that. It's really just, they're fucking fascist-adjacent opportunists. That's all they are. They're going to wind up in that same LaRouche bin with the rest of these fucking nut jobs. Anyway, the part that pissed me off the most with Maupin was his constantly pointing out the sobriety status and legal status. Oh, in that video. Yeah, he's just trying to make his victim less worthy in the eyes of people who could be judging him. He's obviously preying on people at low points in their life. Fuck him. This is about the most uncomradely, anti-solidarity, unsocialistic behavior you could possibly exhibit. Yes. Ooh, wow. Person with the interview. He was briefly in both RCP and WWP and didn't fit with either and had to move on. Well, that's when he's at the 2018 Dugan neo-fascist conference. He's like, he discovered he was a Duganist, actually, which of course is just a new, neo-fascist, like, it's Russian neo-fascism, this particular kind of it. And in that video, he is, which we have on the channel with some commentary by me. This was before I really even knew much about him at all. He's like meeting people and he would explain his political views to them. And then they would tell Maupin, oh, you sound just like Dugan. You're a Duganist. And he's like, who's Dugan? I've never heard of Dugan. And then I finally read Dugan's books and I was like, wow, I love this guy. I am a Duganist. I'm a, quote, populist, because that's what Dugan calls fascism, is populism. And he's like, I'm a populist. And I was like, okay, I guess it's time to delete your channel, because I'm pretty sure you said you were a Marxist-Leninist before, but whatever. So, yeah, he actually found his, found his ideological home, and it's Russian neo-fascism. Not a huge surprise. Huh. I know this will be on basically nobody's radar, but just late last night and early this morning, the DEA, U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, seized a shit ton of research chemical sites and even was able to shut down European ones as well. Huh. Do you have a link for that? Yeah, they were able to infiltrate a lot of left spaces, but this is what I'm saying. The movement was so weak that they couldn't even distinguish neo-fascism from Marxism-Leninism. That's how bad it has gotten. And so I think now, you know, on sort of the road to 2030 here, hoping to have a I'm using that one too. Road to 2030. There we go. On the road to 2030 here, hoping to have some kind of a moment for the far left again. You know, we achieved the stage of strength of the movement to have, you know, gone through the land back question and these other things that we were fighting with the faction that became known as the PATSOCs, Patriotic Socialists. Previously had been loosely known as Nazbols, National Bolsheviks, which was again a kind of like left-right fascist fusion thing that Dugin was involved with back in the day. And now we know that they're LaRouche, and by and large these people have been completely kicked out and they've become parodies of themselves. The whole Mecha Tankie thing on social media, it's an absolute joke. It's self-parody. So this is what I'm saying, is as the movement gets better and people do more of the reading and actually get up the courage to stand up to these people when you see nonsense being spewed in the name of Marxism, socialism, communism, and you challenge it, you know, we will get stronger and stronger at just throwing this stuff off, and it won't be able to penetrate the left in the way that it has, you know. It won't be able to happen again. Doran Russell Brand, yep. Do not invoke the demons by their names. Yeah, return, he barely left, indeed. Yeah, so from the person who interviewed him, I don't think he was, quote, infiltrating left spaces. I know he was reading communist literature as a teenager, and in college he tried on communism. And as he grew up and decided on a career, he made the decision to take whatever opportunities he could to make money. You know, sounds about right to me so far. I watched him for years. He's a complete idiot. He doesn't know anything. He just follows anything that sounds good in the moment and if people are nice to him. I mean, this could apply to pretty much anybody. Jimmy Dore, like, this could apply to most of that set. Kim Iverson, Kim, dumbest person alive Iverson. All these people. Nick, accused rapist Branna. All of them. They don't know anything. It's pure vibes. They just jump from thing to thing. Whatever they can collect some money off of. Absolutely. Yeah, I dropped him after the Boogaloo thing too, somebody says. That was it. I was just like, nope, done, pulling the plug. It was already getting unlistenable, like up to that point. If people remember the, I love making this reference because it was such a moment in time. What the fuck is the guy's name? The guy, hello, I'm author, columnist, journalist, H.A. Goodman. H.A. Goodman. Like back in those days, when the opportunists were sort of putting out their feelers and forming their networks, the H.A. Goodman years, I was like, where is this going? Because for a while, Jimmy Dore was kind of known as like the best one out of the Sockdem gang, and then he started going increasingly like towards libertarian and like MAGA fascist stuff, but it was gradual. It was like over the span of about 3 years that happened. And again, for me, Forced to Vote was like, that was the last gasp of like, you know, the progressivism leaving Jimmy Dore's body. What we need is a common sense revolution. 3 laughing emojis. Thomas Paine was a common sense kind of revolutionary. I mean, yeah. Can we just get back to, let's get back to basic. How about, you know, communism is just about getting back to basics. Let's run on that. That should be good, huh? No, it's not about revolution. It's not about class struggle. It's just about common sense, getting back to basics, rolling up your sleeves, doing some honest work. It's about good ideas, winning the day. That's a bit cathartic. Okay. Oh. We live in really crazy times. Like, these people still exist that would, like, unironically say that kind of stuff. Oh, God. Can we just have like a moment of silence to appreciate none of us here are that person? I appreciate you. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, and silence done. I appreciate you all coming out and not being fucking chuds. It's come out that Maupin has affiliated with Schiller and LaRouche for many years at this point. I don't recall exactly how long, though. Yeah, so Maupin has been out of actual ML organizations for about 7 years now. He made the student... what does it stand for? Student Youth something or other, and then that became CPI. And only freaks, fools, and FBI were joining. The three Fs, if you will. Yeah, definitely. I think they got up to about 200 dues-paying members. And word is still out on how many were exploited, but 4 or 5 came forward. Matt Walsh is an out-and-out, proud, theocratic fascist. Yeah, they definitely exist. I remember back in like the 2000s, starting to like go over. That was the internet was really the Wild West in those days, like especially early 2000s, and libertarians were among the first people out there making their web pages and stuff. And boy, you could find some wild stuff. I remember things about like Christian libertarian. This was when I first started learning what libertarianism was about. Like Christian libertarians, like making web pages about, arguing that men, like husbands should be able to beat their wives because of like it's godly and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, so is this fascism? Like what's going on here? Because I didn't really know what this was. And there's a lot of interesting things out there, I'll tell you that. Shocking. It was to me at the time. Libs are the biggest doomers. They think nothing can change. Yeah, because they have... I mean, that is basically the slogan of the Democratic Party. A better world is not possible. That is pretty much it. Hey, just as an end of the stream general discussion point, what's my opinion on how best to handle people who claim to be leftists but call MLs red fascists? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it's a question worth an answer. I'm a little too tired right now to answer it. But, I mean, most of the time these people are very misinformed. You can just start with some basic questioning. Just say, why do you think that? And then, go point by point. See if you can actually understand why they think that. Fascization, bro, just say Hitler particles. There are a lot of Hitler particles floating around. We've said COVID is now the most contagious thing out there. Hitler particles may be even more contagious. Gramsci, pessimism of the mind, optimism of the will. You just have to keep going. I mean, be realistic about your circumstances, but what else are you going to do? Anyone who calls people red fash or talks about red-brown alliance gets a general ignore from me. Yeah, I mean, you can... it depends on your sort of... For people who are newer to this whole thing and are trying to just, feel out their way through the left and have conversations with people... Again, ask them why they think that and see how far you get. It might be entirely baseless. They might just be saying it because somebody else that they look up to said it. There might be no evidence for it at all. And then you can say, well, that's not really the case, and make your case that that's not correct. The Decay documentary on fascism by Prolocult is so good at explaining the inter-imperialist war aspect, etc. Yeah. They're one of the channels that I've currently linked to. I'll probably be linking to some more channels soon on the YouTube channels tab. As a communist, I'm also uncomfortable even talking about Maupin and Infracell and these fools. They really don't deserve much attention and have already taken up too much space. Sadly, they have a reach in a certain area online, so they have to be addressed, sadly. Yeah, I agree. So we spent a couple of minutes just highlighting, you know, Maupin's back, keep an eye open. I also agree this should not get major attention at this point. Yes. But it is a lesson that we have had to learn, because it sounds like, you know, if you were interviewing Maupin a decade ago or whatever, you know, you may have more experience with this. A lot of the people listening to this may not. They may have come to the left and started really reading stuff like 2 or 3 years ago, and so they're not as fluent in all this stuff. So yeah, it does need to be addressed, and we do try to make S4A, you know, geared to a mass audience of hopefully, you know, useful to both new and more experienced Marxists. So, you know, we're trying to be a community resource pretty much for everybody. And yeah, it sadly does need to be addressed. I do think we will reach a point where it needs to be addressed less and less, because people will just be able to see it for what it is off the bat. U.S. is going mask off fascism this next election. We as leftists need to be ready. Yes. I can't believe that people in the U.S. actually think you can't have a revolution when you have access to weapons. In Greece, we can only have access to double-barreled shotguns. The people who think that they're going to have some kind of armed uprising in the U.S. mostly are fascists. They're mostly like far right-wing militia people who are ready to, like, you know, launch some kind of thing against, you know, the quote, you know, baby killer libs or whatever over abortion. And those are the people most inclined to think that. Of course, that's counter-revolution, but yeah. It's mental. It's psychological. People have been convinced of this. You know, it's just a big mindfuck. People don't believe it for any evidence-based reason. But also, you know, we were talking, you and I, who made that comment, we were talking about, you know, differences in organizing. Like in Greece, you have the KKE, which is, if we had an equivalent to the KKE in the United States, I wouldn't be calling for like a left coalition. I'd be saying people should join that. If we had a functioning communist party that was actually pretty consistent on many issues, I'd probably just be recommending people join that. We don't have that yet. And so when we're talking about the level of overall inactivity and the level of complete disorganization, where I'm encouraging people, obviously, join a Marxist organization, A, if you can find one. Well, actually, A, if you're ready for it, and B, if you can find one, because that's a real question in a lot of areas. But beyond that, I would just like to see people doing something rather than nothing. It doesn't mean that I think that, you know, petty bourgeois parties are like the wave of the future, or, you know, individual activism is like the best of all possible worlds. It's just that I take a more tolerant approach at this stage of the overall level of organization in the U.S. towards certain things which may be possibly stepping stones towards something else. I'm open to having more discussion on that, but it hasn't really even, like the coalition that I'm suggesting, hasn't even really been tried. And you saw some of it maybe around Occupy, but that was very fleeting. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, I think people outside the U.S. may underestimate like how actually bad the psychology is around people viewing the possibility of even organizing at all. Organizing the proles gets you socially isolated, at least where I'm from. Well, everybody wants to pretend that they're rich in the United States, too. This is another huge problem. And it comes from people watching, like, you know, 10 hours of TV a day, where, like, everyone on TV is super rich and all that kind of stuff. And then people who aren't wind up, you know, feeling really ashamed and, like, self-loathing and whatever. Anyway. We have a very bourgeoisified proletariat. And then people who are more unabashedly just working class, yeah, I'm poor, I can't afford the best clothes, whatever, there tends to be like a huge amount of shame, even from other, you know, non-wealthy people about that. Hey, there you go. Make something in the Instapot, which you got, because how's the Instapot been working out for you? And by the way, I think that there are probably better pressure cookers than Instapots. They have the timer and stuff, but yeah, you don't necessarily need one of those. Good, I'm glad you got a pressure cooker. They're immensely useful for making large quantities of food for cheap. All right, you know, I'm trying to catch up with the chat just so that we can finish it out for today. And I'm trying to catch up at the end of the chat. The chat keeps outpacing me. Infracell is literally a walking L. He's what would happen if you mixed a stereotypical misogynistic Twitch gamer with an opportunist. And even worse, honestly. I mean, I think he explicitly came out of that, like, you know, incel manosphere thing. Just absolutely just toxic garbage dumpster fire. It's, again, it doesn't reflect highly on the left that he was able to cultivate the audience that he did. It's because he went out attacking a bunch of bread tubers like early on and, you know, very aggressively, and stood out for that. And I think people got, you know, to be afraid of him. And again, it was like, when you actually listen to him, the guy has no fucking clue what he's talking about. Okay, thank you for that link. Also, Keaton Mansfield, one of Maupin's friends, and also like a, you know, Tradcath fascist as well, is a full-blown anti-communist now. Last time I saw him tweet anything, he was criticizing Lula as a, quote, communist. Yeah, these people are chuds. No, he's different from the Yankee Tankie. These people are super young, too. They're like late teens or 20 or something like that. I mean, Maupin deliberately went after young people, I think, for a reason. How can you tell if someone is with LaRouche? They make references to, well, exonerating LaRouche, promoting LaRouche candidates like Diane Sare, S-A-R-E, so Jackson Hinkle does that a lot now. Talking about the World Land Bridge. What are some other LaRouche tropes? Those are some of the main ones. Infinite growth. So the idea that, like, you know, there's no limits to growth whatsoever. Calling anything environmentalist or, you know, ecology-oriented green fascist, that's another one. So strong anti-environmentalism. Hitler particles, a proletarian science. Long live the immortal proletarian science of Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong thought with particle physics characteristics. There are 3 decent ML orgs in the USA in my view. I like mine best, but the other 2 are doing great work and have solid political lines, say this commenter. Workers' World Party, Freedom Road Socialist FRSO. Freedom Road Socialist Organization and PSL are the ones that they say are 3 decent ML organizations. They're in WWP. Yeah, I mean, just my policy at this point is I'm not endorsing any organizations. You know they exist. I know they exist. What I would like to do is, you know, if you join them, if you feel like you check one out and you feel called to them and you get some experience in it, let the community know how it's going, good, bad, or otherwise. This is going to help more people. You know, I'd like to facilitate that conversation, but again, as far as me making endorsements at this point, I would rather see a coalition of existing groups because I don't see any of those groups being it, where I'm going to be steering people towards that, and that's for a lot of reasons. Yeah, infinite growth is literally a capitalist myth, and the LaRouche neo-fascists are all about it. And another thing, I mentioned guns because we have to be ready in case of a revolutionary situation like the one in Kazakhstan a couple of years ago. Yeah, where my understanding is Russian jackboots were sent in to help crush it. So very very socialist there, for sure. Keaton Mansfield is a fucking idiot. He berated a Nicaraguan opposition woman outside the Holy Rood Church when reps from Nicaragua, or Nicaragua, as they say in some places, came to New York City, and the movement came to protect the event from chuds. Keaton, a white kid, mocked and harassed a brown woman there. I wanted to throttle him, but instead I walked away because I couldn't be trusted not to knock him the fuck out. I understand what you're saying. So anyway, we're going to leave it there for today, and this was mostly just a chat today. You know, we did the thing about Pew Research, just wrapping up from yesterday. We did, public service announcement, be on the lookout for a spanking creep and accused sex exploiter. Otherwise, just hanging out. I did have stories that I kind of wanted to get to today, but I think, election. It'll take it out of everybody. I am not so much for the 3 streams in a week at this point, but I don't know. Maybe I'll consider throwing in one on Friday or Saturday. Otherwise, we will do this again next week. Thanks again to everybody in the chat for helping to make this what it is. Thanks to everybody on YouTube for what you do. Thanks again to the patrons, and we'll see you next time.